Thanks for registering. And as I briefly mentioned on the other side, what I want to tell you about is this green investment that can turn £21,000 into nearly £75,000 while also helping to save the planet. My name's Graham Rowan. I'm a speaker, an author, an investor, and there's quite a few things going on in the economy at the moment that I'm rather nervous about. I think there's going to be a lot of quantitative easing in the Eurozone as they start realizing that they need to prop up their banks and their currency. I also think some of the latest things the government's doing is going to start inflating another house price bubble that will come crashing down at some point in the next few years. I think we're heading for some high inflation, which is even going to further erode the value of our savings. And it's clear that desperate chancellors are going to be looking for new taxes they can raise on any of us with some assets, including further attacks on our pension plans. So there's all sorts of things that are making me nervous, but I suppose there's one thing that I'm really frightened about, which is running out of money in later life. Because if I retire when I'm 60, I could probably live another 25 or 30 years, which is almost as long as I've been working. So how am I going to fund that? Can I rely on the state for a pension? And most of all, how am I going to keep my wife Daphne in shoes and handbags? That's what really worries me and makes me very careful about managing my investments to make sure that I'm not going to end up in this nightmare scenario. If you've done the maths, a pension of just £50,000 a year would need a pension pot of £1.75 million if you were buying an annuity. So if you wanted a six-figure income in retirement, you'd need £3.5 million. The only problem is the government will only allow you to hold £1.25 million. They've reduced that amount in 3 of the last 4 budgets. So if you have the maximum amount you are legally entitled to in your pension, you're only going to get a pension of somewhere between 20 and 30,000, depending on the annuity provider that you go to. So you're going to need other investments outside of your pension, because I've found that no professional manager cares as much about my wealth as I do. The only way I've succeeded is by taking personal control and by looking for extraordinary investments to hold both in and out of my pension, because I can't live on just what I can hold in my pension. So there's one I want to share with you today that is part of my planning for the future, and I think it might well be interesting as part of yours. So what were my criteria in looking for this? Well, I wanted above average returns with an acceptable level of risk, and I wanted something that wasn't directly linked to the stock market, a real physical asset with strong global demand that even my 57-year-old brain could understand. And it was Jim Rogers here, the legendary commodities investor, that first turned me on to the idea of forestry and started me on doing a whole load of due diligence, which has led me to this investment. Some of the things you might not be aware of with regard to timber is obviously it's been around for centuries, but in the last 100 years it's actually outperformed gold and property in terms of its investment returns. Throughout the 20th century it grew at 3.3% above inflation every year on average. That is a phenomenal performance. And in the last quarter century, it's been going up even more strongly, around 14% a year, as global demand for timber increases. Until now, it's mainly been big financial institutions or very wealthy individuals who could get into forestry. But now, a project like this one has enabled it to be accessible to almost everybody, with £7,000 and upwards to invest. So, your parents said money didn't grow on trees. Well, I'm afraid they were wrong. It really does. But it depends which trees and where. What I'm talking about are fast-growing Molina hardwood trees grown by a British company called Ethical Forestry, working in Costa Rica, in Central America. They've got a really expert team of American people, including a professor running these, and there's 120 local staff actually manning the plantations. And they take the whole process through, from seedlings, planting them out, maintaining them, and then harvesting them over the 12-year period to get us some fantastic returns. Jeremy Grantham, who's the chairman of one of the biggest investment companies in the world, GMO, says that timber is the only low-risk, high-return asset that there is. The only low-risk, high-return asset that there is. The Sunday Telegraph said that projected rises in demand as the population grows by 55% over the next couple of decades mean that the demand for timber is bound to grow in line with that. It's a basic commodity of building. It also is used in paper, in packaging, and all sorts of other aspects of our everyday life. As the population grows, quite simply, there's a clear line in parallel with growth in demand for timber. And as far as the Financial Times is concerned, investing in ethically produced timber is key to the future, and it's key to your legacy and my legacy as we try and leave a better planet behind for the next generation. China is going to have a shortfall of 150 million cubic meters of timber in the next couple of years, and India is not far behind with 93 million shortfall by the end of the decade. So as these major population centres grow, they're going to want better standards of housing for their people, and that means more timber. Now, all the plantations are owned direct by the company. There's no land ownership disputes to worry about here, and we have a full agricultural lien on the land on which our trees grow, and it's registered with the Costa Rica government in the document you can see on the right there. Better still, the GPS coordinates of every single tree are taken and registered with the government. And if you want to, if you're really sad, you can just sit on Google Earth and watch your trees growing for the next 12 years. The plantations are run on a very friendly, sustainable, eco-friendly basis. They actually have foresters who live on the plantations. They build them really nice homes there, and so they're very, very well maintained. In terms of how fast the trees grow, on the left, in August of last year, that's when the seedlings were first planted. You can hardly see them. By October, look how big they already are. They're coming halfway up that guy there. They must at least be 3 feet, maybe 3.5 feet high within a couple of months. Move on to November, and again, these guys are almost disappearing within the trees at that stage. By January of this year, you can just make out the speck of a guy. That's Jerry. Jerry's 6 foot tall, and he's hidden in amongst the trees there. And this was taken in June, a couple of months ago, and look at that. It's already towering over this guy. That's how fast they grow in less than 12 months. So these trees grow to 6 meters in 18 months, and if any of them should perish, although it's a very strong species, they don't normally perish, but you will get it replaced free of charge in the first 3 years. The timber already has a value by year 4 when they do the first thinning harvest, so anything that perishes in those first 3 years is replaced free of charge. And you have thinning harvest in years 4, 8 and 10. Basically, to get the trees to grow quickly, they have to cut away the slightly weaker trees. So half the trees disappear in year 4, then a further half of what's left in year 8, and a further reduction in year 10, so that the biggest trees stay for the full 12-year course. The other timber, of course, is not thrown away. That is already usable, so that is sold, and the proceeds come to you in years 4, 8 and 10, as well as at the end in year 12. And it may be a surprise to you, but it's all sold in the local Costa Rica market. Costa Rica is still a net importer of timber. They had such terrible deforestation in the 70s and 80s, they're still recovering from that. And all of this is used locally, mainly to produce pallets for fruit exporters. The returns we're quoting here assume price rises of 7% on average in timber, which is less than half of what's actually been happening in the last decade or so. It's quite a conservative assumption, but that's what these numbers are based on. So when you invest, say, 21,000 up front, that's a typical average investment. You can go as low as 7,000. Most people typically do about 21 to 35, something like that. You would get just over 4,000 back in year 4 from that first thinning harvest, just over 11,000 in year 8, almost 15,000 in year 10, and the biggest payment, something like 45,000 in year 12. Add it all up and you're coming out with around about 75k from your original investment. And as I say, doing an awful lot to help the planet at the same time. Smart Money said that timber's been the only asset class that has risen in 3 of the 4 big market collapses of the 20th century. So, in other words, it's not correlated directly to the stock markets. It's something that will give you some resilience in your portfolio if we are heading for some turbulent times in the financial world. The Guardian said it's flexible, stable investment, and it comes obviously with a clear conscience. This is not weapons, this is not tobacco, this is just good old timber to produce some pallets to export some fruit. What I didn't know when I started researching this is that nearly half of the timber felled in the EC is illegal. There's actually a police agency, a law enforcement agency for forestry in Europe, FLEGT. And that means that as they tighten up on these illegal supplies, the demand for the sustainable stuff is only going to rise. It's only 1% at the moment, and we are in that 1% of timber that is grown in a sustainable way. So the more effective this law enforcement becomes, the higher the demand in Europe will be for this kind of timber, as well as in these new population centers like China and India. Now, you may not have heard of Costa Rica. You may think it translates in your head to Costa Rica. That's really not true. It's been stable for 50 or 60 years now. You can even check the CIA website if you don't take my word for it. It's a politically and economically stable country right there in that thin strip between North America and Latin America. It's actually, the Americans treat it a bit like the Côte d'Azur. They go there on holiday. They've got some lovely retirement properties there. You can see this marina on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. They've actually constitutionally abolished their army, so there's no risk of a military coup because there's no military. They're also going to be the first country on the planet to be carbon neutral within the next 10 years, and already a quarter of the country is protected national park. So it's a really pleasant surprise to discover what Costa Rica's like. And my wife Daphne insists we're going out there to look at our trees next year, so I'll be able to tell you a lot more once we've done that. It's also home to some quite big companies. Intel's invested $750 million in a semiconductor plant. GlaxoSmithKline, Procter & Gamble are there. And they've got their own currency, the colon. It's actually pegged to the US dollar, and all the timber trading and pricing and so on will be carried out in US dollars. It's very highly regulated. Because of the problems of deforestation, the government is now very much taking control. They have state inspectors who go around and check the trees 2 or 3 times a year. They've got great conditions for growing there. You've got a lot of sun and a lot of rain. It's very stable land and the good soil conditions. It's not hot and dry like, say, some parts of Australia, so you don't get forest fires there. They've been growing Molina here safely since the 1960s. They do a lot of work on the plantations before choosing them. They do soil samples. Is the acidity right? Is there good irrigation and so on? And they use the highest quality seeds, because obviously the quality of the tree you're going to end up with depends on the pedigree of the seed. So they use the best seeds available, and they have really detailed care and management procedures. High fencing keeps the animals out. A lot of attention to detail about maintenance of the plantations. The trees are harvested and then categorized by size, and they've got some European standard timber processing plant that they've built there, and that converts the trees into the core blocks, which are the best timber, and the offcuts that are used in the packaging industry, and everything gets used. Even the sawdust is recycled. So it's a very high quality end-to-end operation from the first seedlings through to the logging process. And that even means we get a slightly higher price for our timber, because normally with forestry you get paid what's called the on the stump price, which is when it's chopped down in the forest. But because we actually have effectively our own timber processing facility, we get the at the timber mill price, which is slightly higher than the on the stump price. So it just gives us another little bit of upside when it comes to harvest time. And you can, as we are going to, come and say hello to your trees. You can have inspection trips, tour the plantations, see your own specific trees, as well as have a guided tour of the timber processing plant. But you would not want to go to Costa Rica just to go and look at a few trees in the forest. It's an amazing country, fantastic wildlife, lovely coastlines, lovely sunsets. You really want to make sure you spend at least a week, maybe a couple of weeks, having a really great time in Costa Rica. Very important that any investment is your exit strategy. The program runs for 12 years. But you are the owner of these trees. You can harvest all of them or some of them at any time. So one option, if you wanted all your money out in 5 years' time, is just to say, please harvest the lot and give me whatever it takes. You obviously will get less than the predicted returns we've been talking about, but you still have that choice. There is a withholding tax in Costa Rica, but UK tax residents can avoid this by filling in Form DT 5201 with HMRC. It is actually, funnily enough, not a capital gains tax liability that this gives rise to. It's an income tax liability in the year when the returns are taken. So in years 4, 8, 10 and 12, effectively this would be an increase in your income for tax purposes. You can sell your remaining trees to another investor, and there's a 10% commission charge for that. So if, say, after 5 or 6 years you decided that you wanted to exit the investment and you had somebody who wanted to buy, you could agree a valuation, and the company obviously can help you with that, and then there's just a 10% effectively transfer charge for handling all the paperwork and having to issue new contracts to the new investor and so on. It's obviously a sustainable investment. Your trees are taking in carbon dioxide and then producing breathable oxygen. So, like any tree, this is a great way of helping the planet. Once they're harvested, critically, a large part of the land is going to be replanted with sustainable trees in what's called a forestry easement trust. So there'll be a long-term legacy for wildlife, and you'll be contributing towards creating that area. So it's not that we're going to come in and rape and pillage the land and leave them all, in a scorched earth policy afterwards. We are actually helping to invest in a process which will create and maintain these forestry easement trusts into the infinite future. And that obviously will be a continuing CO2 sink as well, and there'll be wildlife corridors there too. So there's this is not just altruism on behalf of the company. It is a legal requirement by the government. It's a bit like when you get planning permission for a new development in this country, but they want you to create some affordable housing. It's a similar sort of setup here. If you're going to use these plantations to grow commercial woodland, we also want you to create these forestry easement trusts. So it's a great way of getting a win-win for investors and for the environment of the country. We've got people who've invested from 7k up to 127k. These figures are already out of date. Actually, there's more like 2,000 people I think have invested by now, and it's getting up towards that 3.5 million a month maximum investment. So there is a finite amount of this investment available, and it's simply going on a first come first served basis. The only thing I suppose that's a problem with this is if you invest in forestry in the UK, there are certain tax breaks. The problem is the trees over here take about 40 years to grow rather than 12. So unless you're very young with a very long investment horizon, the chances are these tax breaks are not going to be hugely appealing for you. And this is not a regulated investment. This falls outside of the Financial Conduct Authority remit, though of course people like Northern Rock were regulated, and we all know what happened there. So you have to be aware this is not a regulated investment. You obviously must do your own due diligence on that. So once you've paid your money with your order form, you'll get a receipt for that. Your trees are then registered in the nursery, the seedlings are grown, and then usually within about 3 months or so, depending on the time of year, the saplings will be transplanted into the plantation and the GPS coordinates issued. You also receive an investor's owner's pack, which has your coordinates, your cropping rights, and all your ownership documents in it. Your trees are inspected regularly, and you'll occasionally get reports from the harvester team. And typically around year 4, you'll have your first harvest, which can either be sent to you as cash, or there's an option to reinvest that in more trees. One of the things I like about this project compared to some other timber projects is there are no annual management fees charged. All you pay is a 10% harvesting charge at the time of the harvest. So our objectives are totally in line with their objectives. They only get paid when you get paid, and I like investments like that. And obviously there's just an indisputable law of nature here. These trees are going to keep growing regardless of what happens to the stock markets. So as they get bigger, their value increases. And if this year the stock markets are up, so will be the value of the timber. If next year the stock markets are down, the timber will still have gone up in value because it'll have grown some more. So that's why I like this lack of correlation to the markets. It means that, you know, you've got something in your portfolio that's growing regardless of what else is happening in the financial markets. Now, you know, I can't pretend there'll never be a down year in timber values. Of course that happens. But fundamentally, you have an asset that is a real physical thing that is needed to produce real physical stuff, and it's always going to have value. And historically, it looks like we've got 100 years of data to suggest it's going to keep going up. Now, I must just give you a quick disclaimer. I'm not a financial planner. I'm not allowed to give you investment advice. I'm just giving you information about something I've found. It was interesting enough for me to invest in. It may well be of interest to you. But you've got to do your own due diligence or speak to your own financial planner on this. This is information only. It's not investment advice. But if you are interested and you'd like to see more, obviously on this page you can download the brochure, you can download the order form, and you can download the latest newsletter with some great pictures and updates about what's going on in the plantations. I can send you stuff in the mail. I've got more information if you just pop your address in there. Obviously get back to me with questions. There's the phone number and the email address. But if you want to go ahead, it's a simple one-page application. So those are the next steps. Thank you very much for watching. I look forward to talking to you about this great green investment very soon.